My name is Leo. I'm 29, and I live in a quiet corner of Seattle, in a neighborhood called Ballard. It's all old houses and salty air from the nearby locks. I have a simple second-floor apartment that looks out over a bookstore, and I work from home as a freelance graphic designer. I create logos, build websites, and design brochures for companies that want to look more interesting than they are. It's solitary work, but it suits me. It pays the rent and allows me to live inside my own head, which is where I've always been most comfortable. I'm not a man of many words. I've never really been in a serious relationship either. I suppose I always assumed that part of life would sort itself out eventually, but eventually has been taking its sweet time. My life runs on a predictable, self-imposed schedule, but the one variable, the one beautiful bit of chaos in my otherwise orderly existence is Clara. We've been friends, best friends, for almost a decade, ever since we were interns at the same suffocating marketing firm. She's the opposite of me in nearly every way. While I find comfort in quiet, she thrives in noise. She's an event planner, which means her life is a constant whirlwind of vendors, venues, and last-minute disasters. She has fiery auburn hair that she can never quite tame, and a laugh that can fill a room and spill out into the hallway. She's fiercely loyal, painfully honest, and carries her heart a little too close to her sleeve, which is why it's been broken more than a few times. We talk almost every day, but I've always kept a certain part of myself at a distance. I was terrified that if I ever admitted how I really felt, I'd lose the one person who made my quiet world feel whole. So I stayed silent, the reliable friend. I was just Leo. Then came the first Tuesday in November, the day the wind decided to try and tear the city apart. The news had been calling it a historic windstorm all day, but in Seattle, that usually just means it's raining sideways. This time, they were right. By evening, the power was out across half the city. My lights flickered once, twice, and then surrendered completely, plunging my apartment into a deep, howling darkness. I was lighting a few candles when my phone buzzed with a text from her. It just said, "You have power?" I replied, "Nope, just me and a bag of pretzels." A moment later, my phone rang. Her voice was small, strained. A huge branch from the oak tree next door just came through my kitchen window. "It's raining inside my apartment, Leo." I didn't hesitate. "Where are you?" "Still here. I'm a little freaked out." "Pack a bag. You're coming here." There was a pause and then a shaky, "Okay." An hour later, a pair of headlights cut through the torrential rain outside my building. I went down to meet her. She stepped out of her car, wrapped in a giant coat, looking small and soaked. She was holding a duffel bag in one hand and her terrified cat, a fluffy monster named Gus, in his carrier in the other. "You look like a drowned sailor," I said, trying to lighten the mood. She managed a weak smile. "Feel like one." I took her bag and the cat carrier from her. As our fingers brushed, a familiar jolt went through me, one I had spent years learning to ignore. I led her upstairs into the flickering candlelight of my apartment. She stood in the middle of my living room, dripping onto the hardwood floor, and just looked around as if she'd never seen the place before. "Thanks for this, Leo. I didn't know who else to call." I just nodded. "Of course. What else are friends for?" I said the word friends, and it felt like a lie, a comfortable old coat that didn't fit anymore. I didn't know it then, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was about to break inside those four walls. That night, everything I had so carefully kept in its place was about to be rearranged for good. I stood there for a moment, watching her in the unsteady glow of the candles, her hair plastered to her forehead and her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. The usual spark in her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet vulnerability that made my chest ache. I think that's when the shift began. It wasn't love at first sight. This was something deeper, slower, a feeling that had been growing in the dark for years and was only now being forced into the light. For once, I wanted to do more than just be the steady friend in the background. I wanted to be the safe harbor she was looking for. After I got her settled, with Gus the cat tentatively exploring the dark corners of the apartment, the strangeness of the situation began to sink in. We were trapped. No power, no internet, no television to fill the silence. It was just us, the sound of the wind rattling the windows, and the shadows dancing on the walls. Clara had changed into a pair of my old sweatpants and a sweatshirt, and she looked so small in them it was almost comical. She sat curled up on one end of my sofa, a wool blanket wrapped around her, while I tried to figure out what we could eat. "I've got canned chili and some crackers," I offered. "Or we could get really adventurous and have lukewarm cereal." She laughed, a real laugh this time, and the sound of it seemed to push back against the storm. "Chili sounds like a 5-star meal right now." So we ate canned chili by candlelight, sitting on the floor in my living room. It felt strangely domestic, almost like we were playing house. And without the usual distractions, we started to talk. Really talk. Not the quick catch-up conversations we'd have over the phone, but long, meandering discussions about things that mattered. She told me more about her latest breakup with a guy named Mark, someone I'd never liked. She didn't just talk about the end of it, she talked about the beginning, about how hopeful she'd been and how he'd slowly chipped away at her confidence. "He made me feel like I was always too much," she said, staring into the flame of a candle. "Too loud, too emotional, too ambitious." By the end, I started to believe him. I listened, not saying much, just letting her unpack all the hurt she'd been carrying around. I had seen the toll that relationship had taken on her, but I'd never heard her articulate it so clearly. After a while, she turned the conversation to me. "What about you? You never talk about anyone. Are you secretly dating some supermodel and just not telling me?" I gave a short laugh. "Hardly. There's just no one." "Why not?" She pressed gently. "You're a good man, Leo. You're kind and steady, and you actually listen when people talk. That's like finding a unicorn these days." I shrugged, feeling the familiar heat rise in my cheeks. "I don't know. I guess I'm not very good at the beginning part of things. The small talk, the trying to impress someone. I'm better once people already know me. Like me," she said softly. The words hung in the air between us. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Like you." Over the next couple of hours, it felt like the walls I'd built around my feelings for her were starting to crumble, brick by brick. We talked about our families, our dead-end jobs right out of college, the time we'd tried to build an IKEA bookshelf together, and nearly ended our friendship over a single misplaced screw. She told stories with her whole body, her hands moving through the air, her face expressive in the flickering light. And the more she shared, the more I saw the woman behind the whirlwind, the one who was a little scared, a little lonely, and incredibly strong. I didn't try to offer solutions or give advice. I wasn't trying to be her hero. I just stayed present. I just listened. Later, when the wine was gone and the candles were burning low, a comfortable silence settled over us. She was leaning against the sofa, her eyes looking heavy. The storm was starting to die down outside, the wind's howl softening to a low moan. I watched the way the candlelight caught the red in her hair, and I felt a powerful urge to reach out, to smooth a stray strand back from her face. I didn't. Instead, I stood up. "You should get some sleep. You can take my bed. I'll be fine out here on the couch." She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "Are you sure? It's your bed." I nodded, already pulling the spare blankets out of the hall closet. Yeah, of course, I practically live on this couch anyway. I started to make up the sofa for myself, arranging the pillows and unfolding a comforter. I was focused on the task, on doing the right, gentlemanly thing. I didn't see her stand up. I didn't see her walk toward the bedroom. I just kept my back to her, creating a space for myself, reinforcing the very distance I so desperately wanted to close. I had just fluffed a pillow and was about to lay it down when something soft but solid hit me squarely in the back of the head. I stumbled forward a step, confused. I turned around. Clara was standing in the doorway of my bedroom, holding another one of my pillows. Her face was a mixture of exasperation, affection, and something else, something bolder that I'd never seen before. She threw the second pillow onto the bed behind her. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through the last of the wind's noise. I just stared at her, my mind blank. "I'm getting the couch ready." She shook her head slowly, a small, wry smile playing on her lips. Then she looked me straight in the eye, and the world seemed to stop for a second. "Get in here, Leo." My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't a question. It was an instruction, an invitation, a demolition of the boundary we had so carefully maintained for nearly a decade. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My brain was scrambling to catch up with what was happening. This was it. This was the moment where everything could change, where I could either step forward or retreat back into the safety of our friendship. She didn't look away. Her gaze was steady, unwavering, and in it I saw all the fear and hope that was churning inside my own chest. The silence stretched on, filled with the weight of 1,000 unsaid things. Finally, she whispered it again, softer this time. "Please." That's what broke the spell. I dropped the blanket I was holding onto the couch and walked toward her. It felt like the longest walk of my life. Each step was deliberate, closing the physical and emotional distance between us. When I reached the doorway, I stopped right in front of her. She was so close I could feel the warmth radiating from her, could see the faint freckles across her nose in the dim light from the living room. Before I could overthink it, before I could let my fear talk me out of it, I asked the question that had been living in my head for years. "What would you do if I kissed you right now?" There was maybe half a second of hesitation. Then she gave that small, real smile again. She leaned in just slightly, not closing the distance completely, but erasing any doubt. Her breath was warm against my skin. "Find out," she whispered. So I did. It wasn't like the movies. There were no fireworks, no swelling orchestra. It was messy and real and perfect. Her lips were soft, but there was a desperation in the kiss, a release of years of pent-up feelings from both of us. It was a kiss that said, "Finally." When we pulled away, she rested her forehead against mine, and I could feel her trembling slightly. Or maybe that was me. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, breathing her in. Finally, she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "I've wanted to do that for a very long time." "Me too," I admitted, my voice hoarse. She took my hand and led me into the bedroom. We didn't make promises. We didn't define what this meant. She just pulled back the covers on the bed, and we got in. I lay there on my back, and she curled up against my side, her head on my chest. I wrapped my arm around her, holding her close. We just lay there for a long time in the dark, listening to the sound of each other's breathing as the storm outside finally passed. I had no idea what the morning would bring, whether this was a mistake or the best decision of my life. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I was on the outside looking in. I was here, with her, and that was enough. The morning after the storm, I woke up before the sun. For the first time in as long as I could remember, the silence in my apartment didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful, full. I was lying on my side, and Clara was still asleep, her back to me, her hair a wild tangle on the pillow. The power was still out, and a cool grey light filtered through the window. I lay there for a long time, just watching the slow rise and fall of her shoulders with each breath, terrified that if I moved, I would break the spell. Last night felt like a dream, a strange, beautiful fever dream brought on by wind and wine and candlelight. But she was still here. That part was real. I carefully slipped out of bed, trying not to wake her. I pulled on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt and went into the living room. The blankets I'd set out for myself were still crumpled on the couch, a reminder of the choice I'd almost made. I folded them neatly and put them away. I looked out the window. The sky was clear, and the street below was littered with leaves and fallen branches. The world was moving on, and a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. What now? What were we now? Were we friends who had a moment of weakness in a blackout? Or were we something more? The uncertainty was terrifying. Around 8:01 a.m., the power suddenly kicked back on. The refrigerator hummed to life, the digital clock on the oven blinked 12, and the sudden return to normalcy felt jarring. A few minutes later, Clara emerged from the bedroom, rubbing her eyes. She was wearing my sweatshirt, which hung down to her mid-thigh, and her feet were bare. She looked soft and sleepy and beautiful. "Hey," she said, her voice husky. "Hey," I replied, trying to sound casual, as if I hadn't just spent an hour having a silent panic attack. She walked over to the kitchen counter and leaned against it, wrapping her arms around herself. The air between us was thick with unspoken questions. She wouldn't meet my eyes. My heart sank. She was regretting it. I was so sure of it. This was the moment she would say it was a mistake, that we should just forget it happened. I decided to face it head-on. About last night. I started, but my voice trailed off. She finally looked up at me, her expression guarded. "Yeah. About last night." She took a deep breath. I'm not good at this, Leo." "At what?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "This. The morning after. The part where we have to figure out what this means." She ran a hand through her messy hair. "My life is a complete disaster right now. My apartment is wrecked. I just got out of a relationship that made me question everything, and I feel like I'm constantly just trying to keep my head above water." I frowned. "What does that have to do with me?" She shook her head, a look of frustration on her face. "It has everything to do with you. You're the one stable thing in my life. You're my best friend, the one person I know I can count on, no matter what. And last night, it was wonderful. It was more than wonderful. But it was also terrifying, because what if we mess this up? I can't lose you, Leo. I can't." Her voice cracked on the last words, and I saw tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't rejection. It was fear. The same fear that had kept me silent for years. I walked over to her, closing the space between us. I gently took her hands in mine. They were cold. "Hey," I said softly, waiting until she looked at me. "Did I do something wrong?" She shook her head quickly. "No. You didn't do anything wrong. You did everything right. That's the problem." A long pause settled between us. "I liked last night," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe more than I should have, and that scares me." "Why?" I asked. "Because my life is already complicated. I don't have room for feelings that make me feel this vulnerable." I took a breath. Every instinct was telling me to back off, to give her an easy out, to say we could go back to being friends. But I couldn't. Not after last night. "I'm not asking for anything complicated," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not asking you to fix your life or for you to fix mine. I really like being with you. And I think I've been in love with you for a very long time." The confession tumbled out before I could stop it, raw and honest. Her eyes widened, the tears finally spilling over and tracing paths down her cheeks. The silence that followed wasn't angry or cold. It was heavy, like the air before a storm breaks. I thought I had pushed too hard, that I had broken the one rule of our friendship. I started to pull my hands away, but she tightened her grip. "You're not going to argue?" she asked, a watery smile touching her lips. "You're not going to try and convince me?" I shook my head. I've never been good at arguing, especially not when I know someone's hurting. She let out a shaky breath. "You're a good man, Leo." I smiled sadly. "Yeah, well, don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my mysterious reputation." That earned me a small, genuine laugh. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm not saying never," she said, echoing the words from my own fears. "I'm just saying, I'm scared." I nodded slowly. "Okay, I get it. I'm scared too." I let go of one of her hands and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with my thumb. "So what do we do?" I asked. She looked at me, her gaze clear and direct for the first time all morning. "I guess," she said, a hint of her old spark returning. "We figure it out, slowly." I nodded again, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washing over me. We weren't broken. We were just beginning. It's been 10 months since the night of the windstorm. I remember every detail. The sound of her voice on the phone, the way she looked standing in my doorway, the feel of her head on my chest in the dark. That night became our foundation. Not a grand romantic gesture, but a quiet, shared vulnerability. We decided to be patient. That was our only rule. No pressure, no expectations. We started over in a way. We went on our first official date a week later. I took her to a tiny Italian restaurant she'd always wanted to try. It was awkward and wonderful. We were navigating this new territory, learning how to be more than friends. I started coming with her to the chaotic weekend events she planned, not as a helper, but just to be there, to bring her coffee, to be a calm presence in her storm. She started spending nights at my place, even after her window was fixed. My quiet apartment started to feel more like a home. It started to feel like ours. There were hard days. Sometimes her past would creep back in. She'd get quiet, distant. Once I found her sitting on my balcony, just staring out at the city lights. She didn't say much, just, "I thought my life would be so different by now." I didn't try to fix her sadness. I just sat down next to her, put my arm around her, and waited with her until it passed. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "You make it easier to breathe." That was the night I knew for certain. This wasn't a fleeting feeling. This was real, earned love. The kind that doesn't need to shout because it shows up day after day. In July, my biggest client, the one that made up half my income, went out of business unexpectedly. It hit me hard. I felt like a failure, like my stability was a sham. I didn't tell her for 2 days, trying to solve it on my own. On the 3rd day, she showed up at my apartment with takeout and a bottle of wine. She stood in my doorway and said, "Don't you dare disappear on me, Leo. Not after everything." I told her I felt like a loser. She just looked at me and said, "Well, I felt like a failure when I had to move back in with my parents for 6 months after my last breakup. And yet, here we are. Neither of us is broken. We're just rebuilding." She sat with me all night, helping me update my portfolio and sending emails to her contacts. Within 2 weeks, I had landed 2 new, better clients. By the fall, we had found our rhythm. My apartment was filled with her things, a stack of her books on my nightstand, her favorite mug in my cupboard, her ridiculous collection of brightly colored scarves draped over a chair. We had a routine of Sunday morning breakfasts and Wednesday night movies. And somewhere between the shared meals and the quiet evenings, Clara started to smile differently. It wasn't the big, bright smile she used for her clients. This one was softer, slower. It was the smile of someone who had let her guard down and didn't regret it. A month ago, I brought up the idea of her officially moving in. We were cooking dinner together, a messy, chaotic process that always ended with us laughing. I was chopping onions, and I said casually, "What would you think about maybe making this permanent? You moving in here, I mean." She stopped stirring the pasta sauce and turned to look at me. She didn't answer right away. She just walked over, took the knife out of my hand and set it down. Then she wrapped her arms around my neck. "You're the first man I've ever felt safe with," she said. "So yeah, let's make it permanent." We didn't make a big deal about it. We just started moving the rest of her boxes over the next weekend. Today is our first Sunday morning as official roommates. She's curled up on the sofa in one of my hoodies, her feet tucked under her, reading a book. The apartment smells like coffee and the rain outside. I sit down beside her. She leans into me without looking up from her page. We don't need to talk all the time anymore. We've learned to exist together in a comfortable silence. After a few minutes, I say, "Do you remember what I asked you that night in the bedroom doorway?" She smiles without looking up. "You asked what I'd do if you kissed me." She closes her book, setting it aside, and turns her head toward me. Her eyes are soft and clear. And I said, "Find out." I grin. "I still feel that way." "More than ever," she says, putting her hand on my cheek. I lean in and kiss her. It's different now. Not desperate or uncertain. It's calm and deep and sure. It feels like coming home. When we pull away, she whispers, "Thank you for being patient. Thank you for not running when I was scared." I shake my head. "You were never something to be fixed, Clara. I think I just needed someone to show me I was worth the risk." She holds my gaze, her thumb gently stroking my jaw. "You always were." And that's our story. It didn't start with a thunderclap, but with a storm. It wasn't a grand romance, but a quiet friendship that finally got brave. We built this life not in a rush, but slowly, honestly, breath by breath. And now, we live here.